Stop. Before you watch another history documentary, you need to hear this. Everything you were taught about ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, the home of pure Hellenic blood, the origin of Western civilization, is built on a story that science just destroyed. Not challenged, not questioned, destroyed. In 2017, a team of researchers from Harvard Medical School, the Max Planck Institute, and the University of Washington went into ancient Greek tombs. They drilled into 3,500-year-old teeth. They extracted DNA from the bones of people who built the palaces, fought the wars, and wrote the myths. And what came out of those teeth was not what anyone expected. The Minoans, the legendary civilization of Crete, the people who painted the frescoes, built the palace of Knossos, and inspired the myth of the Minotaur, did not come from Europe. The Mycenaeans, the warriors behind the Trojan War, the people Homer wrote about, did not come from some pure Greek bloodline stretching back to creation. Both of them, at least 3/4 of their ancestry, traced directly to Neolithic farmers from Western Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. This wasn't a fringe theory from a blog. This was published in Nature, the most respected scientific journal on Earth, by lead researcher Iosif Lazaridis at Harvard Medical School, alongside George Stamatoyanopoulos from the University of Washington. 3/4, Turkey, and modern Greeks, the people alive today, descend directly from those same Mycenaeans. So here's the question nobody is asking loudly enough. If the people who built ancient Greece came from Anatolia, mixed with steppe herders from Central Asia, mixed with traders from the Levant and Egypt, then what does it actually mean to be Greek? And here is an even bigger question, one that this video is going to answer layer by layer, using real science, real researchers, real genome data. What does it mean to be anyone at all? If you have ever been curious about where you actually come from, subscribe right now, because this channel exists for exactly this. And before we go 1 second further, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Have you ever done a DNA ancestry test? Did it shock you or confirm what you already felt? Drop it below. I read every single one. Yeah, because by the end of this video, you might be ordering a test tonight. Now, if the Greeks came from Anatolia, who were these people? Where exactly did they come from? And how did a group of ancient farmers from Turkey end up building the civilization that gave the world philosophy, democracy, and the Olympic Games? The answer takes us back further than you expect. 8,000 years. Before Greece had a name. 8,000 years ago, Greece was empty of everything we associate with it. No marble, no temples, no olive groves stretching to the horizon, just wild forest, and small groups of hunter-gatherers who had roamed those lands for 40,000 years. Then something shifted in Anatolia. A group of early farmers, people who had learned to grow wheat, keep goats, and build permanent shelters, began moving west. And they crossed the Aegean. They stepped onto Greek soil, and they never left. A 2022 study in Nature Scientific Reports confirmed what their bones recorded across hundreds of burial sites. These Neolithic farmers carried maternal DNA, haplogroups H, J, T, and N1A, and paternal haplogroups G, 2A, and J2. Today, those same markers are among the most dominant lineages in modern Greeks. These people did not visit Greece. They became Greece. And here is the part that stops people cold. The original inhabitants, the hunter-gatherers who had lived in Greece for 40,000 years, were almost completely replaced. Not by war, not by plague, by farming. Because farmers produce more food. More food means more children. More children means more DNA surviving into the next generation. Within a few thousand years, the old bloodlines faded. The Anatolian farmers filled every valley, every coastline, every island. They were the genetic foundation of what the world would one day call ancient Greece. Not warriors from Europe, not some noble bloodline descended from Zeus. Farmers from Turkey, who planted wheat. And here is what makes this even more striking. Researchers comparing Cretan mountain villages today found haplogroup G2A, the Anatolian farmer marker, at frequencies as high as 90% in some isolated communities, the world's highest concentration, still there, after 8,000 years. Those Anatolian farmers never left. They are still in the ground and still in the blood of the people who live on Crete today. But farming was only the first layer, because a second wave was coming from a completely different direction, from the north. So from the cold, open steppe. And they were not farmers. They were something far more dangerous. Picture the Eurasian steppe, an endless, flat ocean of grass stretching from Hungary all the way to Mongolia. No trees, no borders, no cities, just wind, horses, and people who had learned to move, fast, far, and together. Around 3000 BCE, they started moving west. Scientists call them the Yamnaya, tall, nomadic, built around cattle and horses, and carrying a specific genetic signature that would permanently reshape every population it touched. In 2015, a landmark study by Wolfgang Hack, David Reich, and colleagues, published in Nature, confirmed one of the most dramatic population events in European prehistory. The Yamnaya migration from the Caspian Pontic steppe was so large, so fast, and so genetically dominant that it replaced the male lineages of entire regions of Europe within just a few centuries. Y chromosome haplogroups R1a and R1b, carried by these steppe people, spread from the Baltic to the Mediterranean almost like a wave, and it reached Greece. Now, Greece was not flooded like Northern Europe was. But the Mycenaean genome data is clear. Roughly 10 to 15% of Mycenaean ancestry traces back directly to Caucasus-related steppe populations, a layer smaller than in Germany or Britain, but absolutely real, permanently embedded. And here is the part that will rearrange how you think about language itself. Linguists and geneticists now agree. The ancient Greek language, the tongue that spoke Homer, that built philosophy, that gave us the word democracy, almost certainly arrived with these steppe migrants or their close relatives. The language of Socrates was born on the grasslands of Central Asia. It arrived in Greece on horseback. So by the Bronze Age, by the time Mycenae was at its peak, the Greek genome was already a three-layer structure, ghost traces of ancient hunter-gatherers underneath, Anatolian farmer DNA as the core, a cap of steppe warrior ancestry on top. None of it was purely Greek. All of it, together, built what we call Greece. But something was about to break it all apart. Around 1200 BCE, one of the greatest catastrophes in human history struck the entire Mediterranean. Palace after palace burned. Civilizations that had stood for centuries collapsed in decades. Trade networks died, writing disappeared. Some historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. And in the chaos, a terrifying group appeared on Egyptian temple walls, warriors from the sea. No one knew where they came from, and for 3,000 years, no one could answer it, until scientists opened the right graves. The Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses III had them carved into temple walls, rows of warriors, coming by sea, coming by land, destroying everything in their path. He called them the Sea Peoples. He claimed to have defeated them. But entire civilizations had already fallen before he fought them. For 3,000 years, this was history's greatest mystery. Who were the Sea Peoples? Where did they come from? Why did they appear right when the Bronze Age was dying? So in 2019, ancient DNA from burial sites at Ashkelon, a coastal city in ancient Canaan, gave the first real answer. The study, published in Science Advances, found something that flipped the entire debate. The very first individuals buried at Ashkelon right after the Bronze Age collapse, the ones who arrived with the Sea Peoples, carried clear genetic signatures from southern Europe. Specifically, from populations connected to the Aegean world, Greek origin DNA, found in ancient Canaan. These were not random raiders from nowhere. They were most likely Aegean peoples, possibly displaced Greeks, who had fled the very collapse everyone blamed them for causing. They were not invaders, they were refugees. Desperate people, moving east, carrying everything they had left, including their DNA. And then it gets more human than you expect. Within just 2 to 3 generations, the DNA of those same families at Ashkelon blended completely with local Canaanite populations. The terrifying invaders from Egyptian carvings, within a single lifetime, became neighbors, married locals, had children who looked and lived like everyone around them. The monster on the temple wall became the man next door. That means, right now, in the modern Middle East, there are people carrying a fragment of ancient Aegean DNA. Not because of empire, not because of conquest, because someone, 3,200 years ago, lost their home and had to start over. That is not ancient history. That is a human story. But while some Greeks were escaping east, inside Greece itself, something was building that would redefine what a Greek soldier even was. Because when researchers finally opened the tombs of a famous classical Greek army, the DNA inside those graves broke every assumption about Greek identity in the ancient world. 480 BCE, the Battle of Himera, Sicily. Greek colonial forces standing together against a Carthaginian invasion, one of the defining moments of Greek military glory, celebrated for centuries as proof of Greek courage, Greek unity, Greek blood. In 2022, researchers from Harvard Medical School opened their graves. The study, led by Lori Reitzema and published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, sequenced full genome data from soldiers buried at Himera. Most of the soldiers showed exactly what you would expect: late Bronze Age Greek ancestry, Aegean origin, clean Hellenic profiles. But then, the outliers. While some soldiers carried steppe nomad ancestry at levels of 11 to 15%, higher than typical mainland Greeks of that period. And then, buried among Greek heroes, two individuals carrying mitochondrial haplogroup A6A, a 6A. That is an East Eurasian maternal lineage. It traces to populations from the far eastern edges of the ancient world, thousands of miles from Greece, from Sicily, from the Aegean. These men died at Himera. They were buried with Greek soldiers. They wore Greek armor. They probably spoke Greek. But their mothers, somewhere in their ancestry, came from the far eastern edge of the known world. Nobody recorded their real names. Nobody asked where their grandmothers were from. History just called them Greek and moved on. The Greek army at its most celebrated moment was genetically one of the most diverse forces in the ancient Mediterranean. Now, hold that thought, because if the army looked like this, imagine what the islands looked like. The islands that sat at the crossroads of Greek, Phoenician, Egyptian, and Levantine trade routes for 3,000 years. Islands where even the gods refused to stay purely one thing. Cyprus sits in the eastern Mediterranean like a crossroads that nobody could avoid. To the north, Greece and Anatolia. To the east, Phoenicia, the Levant, the ancient Middle East. To the south, Egypt. Every ship that carried goods, soldiers, refugees, or traders across the eastern Mediterranean passed Cyprus. Every empire that rose left a mark. In 2024, a study published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences analyzed mitochondrial DNA from 406 Cypriot individuals, including Greek Cypriots. The results showed exactly what 3,000 years of crossroads living would produce. Maternal lineages tracing deep into Levantine ancestry. Near Eastern haplogroups woven through what people call Greek Cypriot blood, Anatolian Bronze Age ancestry as the base, with layer after layer of outside influence sitting on top. Greek Cypriots are not simply Greek. They are a living genetic archive of the entire Eastern Mediterranean. And the temples told the same story the DNA did. Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, was worshipped on Cyprus. But on the same island, in some of the same temples, the Phoenician goddess Astarte was worshipped too. Same altar, different name. Different people, but the same offering left at the same stone. The gods merged on Cyprus because the people did, and genetically, the most common paternal marker in both Greeks and Cypriots, Y haplogroup J2, traces directly back to those Anatolian and Levantine farmer populations. The bloodline that modern Greeks carry as their most common paternal identity predates the concept of Greece by 6,000 years. The identity is young, the blood is ancient, but none of what we have covered so far, not the Anatolian farmers, not the steppe riders, not the sea peoples, not the diverse army, not the island crossroads, none of it prepared science for what was discovered in February 2026, just weeks ago, in a remote mountain peninsula at the very southern tip of Greece, a place so isolated that the ancient blood never changed. And when researchers tested the people living there, they found ancient Greeks, still alive. There is a place in southern Greece that time forgot. It is called the Mani Peninsula. Rugged mountains on one side, sea on three sides, one road in and out for most of its history. The people who lived there, called Deep Maniots, are known for being proud, fierce, and intensely private. They have their own dialect, their own clan structure, their own unbroken sense of who they are. And in February 2026, a team from Oxford University, Tel Aviv University, and the National University of Athens published a study in communications biology that confirmed something extraordinary. So they tested 102 deep maniots, sequencing Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA at high depth using 155,000 probes and analysis of 750,000 genetic markers, and compared the results to over 1 million people worldwide, plus thousands of ancient DNA samples. The conclusions stopped the scientific community cold. Deep maniots are one of the most genetically distinct populations in all of Europe. Their dominant Y chromosome lineage, called JL930, appears in 51% of deep maniot men. It is barely found anywhere else on Earth. The researchers literally named it the Deep Maniot Modal Lineage because it essentially belongs only to them. Many of their other lineages trace directly back to Bronze Age, Iron Age, and Roman period Greece, while the rest of mainland Greece absorbed approximately 22% Germanic and Slavic DNA during the medieval migration period. Deep Mani shows those lineages at near zero frequency. The medieval migrations that genetically transformed the Balkans and most of mainland Greece never reached those mountains. Lead researcher Dr. Leonidas Romanos Davronoglu from Oxford University said it plainly. Deep maniots preserve a snapshot of the genetic landscape of southern Greece before the demographic upheavals of the early Middle Ages. But here is the part that is genuinely stunning. History knew this before science confirmed it. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII, writing in the 10th century CE, described the Deep Maniots as people not of the lineage of the Slavs, but of the Romans of old, who were called Hellenes. An emperor wrote it 1,100 years ago. Oxford proved it last month. Ancient Greece did not just survive in books and ruins. It survived in people, walking, breathing, living on a mountain in 2026. But now, take everything we have just discovered about what Greece was made of, and ask yourself a different question. What happened when Greece stopped being a place and became an empire? What happened when one man took all of that mixed, layered ancient blood and spread it across the entire known world? 323 BCE Babylon, the greatest conqueror the ancient world had ever seen, dead at 32. Alexander of Macedon had, in just 13 years, built an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt, from Persia to the edge of India. Everywhere his army went, they built cities. He married local women, had children, and those children carried something invisible but permanent, Greek DNA, scattered across 3 continents. In 324 BCE, at the Persian city of Susa, Alexander hosted what historians call the Susa weddings. He and 91 of his senior officers all married Persian noblewomen, simultaneously, in a single massive ceremony. Alexander himself married Statira, daughter of King Darius. He was not just cementing political alliances, he was deliberately creating a new kind of people, a Greek-Persian hybrid ruling class, by royal command, and the genetic echoes of that journey survive to this day. Seeing studies examining Y chromosome data and ancient DNA markers have traced Greek origin genetic signatures appearing in populations across Alexander's former military routes, from Turkey and Iran through Central Asia and into South Asia. But nowhere is the mystery more alive than in the mountains of northern Pakistan. A community called the Kalash, roughly 4,000 people, lives in narrow valleys near the ancient route of Alexander's army. They have light skin, blue and green eyes, blonde and brown hair. They pour wine at their festivals. They sing and dance at ceremonies that echo ancient Greek ritual practices in ways researchers have found difficult to explain away. And they have claimed for generations that they descend from soldiers in Alexander's army. A 2006 study published in PMC identified Eastern Mediterranean Y chromosome markers in South Asian populations along Alexander's route. The signal is small, But it is real, and it is there. Modern science has not fully confirmed the Kalash-Alexander connection, but it has not dismissed it either. The testing is not finished. The story is not closed. And while Alexander's DNA was spreading east, back inside Greece itself, the people left behind were about to face the question this entire video has been building toward. When modern Greeks sit down with a DNA kit today, after all of this history, all of this mixing, all of these migrations, what do they find? The answer is the most surprising twist of all. For years, a fierce debate raged between historians, archaeologists, and geneticists. Are modern Greeks actually related to ancient Greeks, or were they replaced by Slavic tribes in the 6th and 7th centuries, by Ottoman settlers over 400 years, by waves of migration that swept through the Balkans again and again? Some said continuity, some said replacement. The debate was so heated, it was almost political. Then the science settled it. Research coordinated with Harvard's Reich Lab and the Max Planck Institute, along with data from 726 ancient Balkan genomes and thousands of modern Greek samples, confirmed the answer. Modern Greeks maintain 70 to 80% genetic continuity with Bronze Age Mycenaeans and Minoans. The core structure, the foundation, has been preserved across 4,000 years. The Science Journal put it directly. Modern Greeks share similar proportions of DNA from the same ancestral sources as Mycenaeans, carrying slightly less Anatolian Neolithic ancestry and slightly more from later migrations. Continuity, real, measurable, documented. But here is where it gets complicated. While 600 years of Roman rule and 400 years of Ottoman rule left almost no genetic mark on Greek populations, less than 2% combined, the Slavic migrations of the early Middle Ages did leave traces in mainland Greece. Around 4 to 6% R1, a haplogroup in northern mainland populations, near zero on the islands and in Deep Mani, where those ancient lineages survived untouched. Same country, wildly different genetic histories, separated by geography and a mountain range. And here is the twist that mainland Greeks do not see coming. The most common Y chromosome haplogroup in modern mainland Greeks today, EV13, appears in 21 to 35% of Greek men. For years, people assumed this was the most ancient, most Greek marker possible. But test the Deep Maniots, the most genetically ancient Greeks alive, and EV13 appears in less than 1% of them. The marker that modern mainland Greeks most identify as Greek DNA is almost completely absent from the Greeks who are closest to the ancient world. That is not a footnote. That is the entire story, flipped upside down. So what happens when an ordinary Greek person, not a researcher, not a professor, just a person living in Athens or Thessaloniki or on Crete, opens a DNA test result? What do they feel when the numbers come back? Imagine sitting at a kitchen table, a small plastic tube in front of you. You spit into it, you seal it, you post it. 6 weeks later, a notification arrives. You click, the numbers load, and everything you thought you were starts to shift. This is happening to Greeks right now, every week, in kitchens in Athens and Heraklion and Thessaloniki, and in Greek communities in Melbourne, Chicago, and London. Autosomal DNA studies show that modern Greeks cluster most closely with Southern Europeans, particularly Italians, Albanians, and other Balkan populations, reflecting their shared inheritance of Anatolian farmers, steppe migrants, and Bronze Age civilization. But inside that broad picture, surprises wait. A Greek man from mainland Greece opens his results and finds 12% Slavic ancestry. A Greek woman from Rhodes discovers Levantine maternal markers older than the Bronze Age. A Greek Cypriot finds Near Eastern haplogroups tracing to ancient Phoenicia, and the reactions are real, shock, denial. Then, slowly, something deeper, a kind of peace. Because the DNA is not saying, you are not Greek. The DNA is saying, being Greek was never about a single bloodline. It was always about a culture that absorbed, transformed, and gave back. Always about people arriving, staying, building something new on top of what came before. The philosopher Socrates walked the streets of Athens and said one thing above everything else: know thyself. For 2,500 years, people tried to answer that through myth, religion, war, and nationalism. Today, the answer comes in a tube, delivered by a lab, powered by science that Socrates could never have imagined. No, and it says exactly what his philosophy always suspected. You are more than one story. You always were. But even after all of this, the farmers, the steppe riders, the sea people, the diverse army, the island crossroads, the frozen mountain, Alexander's empire, the DNA test on the kitchen table, one final thread remains loose, one population we have not fully examined, one mystery that the science has touched, but not solved. And it might be the most powerful question this entire video has been building toward. We have traveled 8,000 years in this video, from Anatolian farmers stepping onto Greek soil before history had a word for Greece, to Bronze Age palaces built on hybrid bloodlines that three civilizations shared, to steppe riders who brought a language we still call classical, to sea people refugees whose descendants live in the modern Middle East, to a classical army with East Eurasian DNA buried in Sicilian soil, to an island where Greek gods merged with Phoenician ones, to a mountain where ancient Greek DNA survived, unchanged, into February 2026, to a man who married Persian princesses and planted Greek genes from Egypt to Pakistan, to a modern Greek opening a DNA test and seeing the truth for the first time. The science is clear. Modern Greeks are 70 to 80% continuous with Mycenaeans and Minoans, those Bronze Age people descended from Anatolian farmers mixed with steppe migrants. Those farmers came from the Near East, 8,000 years before the Parthenon was built. Greek is not a starting point. It is a destination. So a place where dozens of bloodlines arrived, merged, and across centuries chose to call themselves one thing. But here is what the DNA cannot tell you. It cannot measure the moment someone looked at the Aegean Sea and asked why. It cannot explain the leap from survival to philosophy. It cannot tell you why this particular group of mixed, layered, migrant people, of all the people on Earth, chose to write down the idea of democracy and give it to the world. The genome records the journey. It cannot record the meaning. The deep Maniots, the most genetically ancient Greeks alive today, do not feel more Greek than a man in Athens whose Y chromosome arrived from the north 1,200 years ago. Because identity is not stored in a haplogroup. It is stored in stories, in rituals, in the way a grandmother teaches a child to make bread on a Sunday morning, in the words someone learned before they could walk. DNA gives us truth, but it does not give us home. Home is something humans built, on top of the bones, on top of the genes, on top of migration after migration, layer by layer, for 8,000 years. And now, one question is still open. One population, 3,500 miles from the Aegean, in the mountain valleys of northern Pakistan, still pouring wine, still dancing at festivals that echo ancient Greek ritual, still carrying blue eyes and light hair that does not belong, genetically, in those mountains. Are the Kalash people the last living descendants of Alexander the Great's army? The DNA testing is still running. The answer is still being written. And when it comes, history wrote their names out of the story. The DNA kept the receipts.